Dr. Haley Perlis, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me again, you should say. I would say welcome back to the podcast, but our listeners have not experienced you before, even though I have interviewed you last week. And I got to fess up that the tech just had a little gremlin in it after 17 minutes. It's just, there was no me and just you talking to yourself.
That happens all the time when I'm just talking to myself, but we got a dry run. We got simulation training.
We did get simulation training, which is very important in peak performance, isn't it? Yeah. And that's a little nice segue. So you are a sports psychologist. Tell us, first of all, what brought you into that field?
A great story, if I can say so myself. I'm so lucky. I grew up as a ski racer, and a pretty good one. And when I peaked at 12, so I should say I was a pretty good one at 12.
You peaked at 12.
But I was 12 years old, and I was competing in the world championship for my age group. And my coach,
oh wow!
And my coach, right before I was about to compete, pulls out 100. I'm Canadian, so he pulled out $100 Canadian bill, placed it in front of my face, and told me that he had bet on me to win this junior world championship.
Wow, that's an interesting technique.
I don't recommend it, but it worked.
Really? Wow. So what was the motivation behind that?
Well, it can go two ways, right? On one hand, it can go to anger, frustration, worry, fear. How could a coach bet on me and tell me what if he's wrong? What if I make a mistake and let him down?
Yeah.
On the flip side, are you kidding me? If
he
you're
has faith,
betting on
he has
me,
trust.
You trust me. You believe in me. That's cool.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, wow, if my coach has high expectations, doesn't that mean I'm doing something right? And I went down, and I did win. This is funny. My coach came down, congratulated me, kept all the money for himself. But he said something to me that carved out my life. He said, it's amazing what your performance can be like when you get your head straight. And then 2 weeks later, he brought a sports psychologist to come and speak to my team, and click, I went home and I told my parents at 12 that I wanted to be a sports psych gal when I grew up.
Oh, wow. I wonder how many people have a story of what they wanted to be when they were 12 that they went on to actually do. That's really interesting. So interesting at 12 years old being at the World Championships. What was the pressure like for you then? Did you feel the pressure, or were you just like this 12-year-old going, this is really exciting, and didn't really process the weight of what you were doing?
Well, and remember, it was the World Championships for my age group, right? So it was this big event. Yeah. I was chosen as Team Canada. There was a lot of excitement, but I don't think I had like pressure other than the fact that I was chosen. I'm good enough to be here and to wear the Team Canada jacket, and I think I embraced it. I have great parents. I have great parents, and this coach, even though he put a pressure on me, he also, I believed, coached me to embrace pressure. Pressure is a privilege. Pressure means you're doing well.
Yeah.
And I think he ingrained that inside of me. And I don't think I felt a whole lot of anxiety. Nervousness and excitement, absolutely. Anxiety, not so much.
Yeah, very cool. I love that. Pressure is a privilege. And often pressure comes with mental blocks. And in your book, Personal Podium, you talk a lot about overcoming mental blocks. And as a sports psychologist, I think that's kind of bread and butter, isn't it? Helping people to overcome mental blocks. So what are some of the biggest mental blocks that you see with people? And how can we address them? And before you get into that, I think we do need to let people know, not only are you a sports psychologist, but you also work with a lot of executives. And I know a number of sports psychologists, and the techniques are very, very applicable to the business world. Anybody who has to, or military, anyone who has to perform under pressure, like sports psychology, that's where you want to go to, right? So, talk to us about some of the biggest mental blocks you see in athletes and executives, and what are some things that people can do to overcome them, and where do they come from as well? Let's just dive into the world of mental blocks.
It's true. And and similar to you too, using techniques for health behavior change as well. So wellness, business
Yeah.
and sport. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear of, if I do it once, then I'm going to have the pressure to do it over and over and over again. There's the fear of living up to the reputation that I create for myself. Competitive anxiety. If people don't know how to embrace competition, they have a mental block around competition. Injury, damaging themselves. Discomfort, the sacrifices that you're gonna have to make. With every health behavior change, with every success, there are sacrifices. And so that comes with a whole lot of mental blocks as well.
And so, what are some things that people actually, before we get into the things that people can do you find there is a different motivator or a different driver between fear of failure versus fear of success? Because everybody will have heard of fear of failure, but not a lot of people will probably have heard of fear of success, although there are big mental blocks around people, just don't do it because then you're going to have to live up to it.
It's a big thing. And actually there are a lot of people who, may be talented, may have the mental skill set, but they don't want the responsibility of needing to win and stay on top, that they won't ever let themselves get there. Because the chase to be first is actually, in my humble opinion, easier than staying first. And so Tiger Woods said it the best. The difference between the great and just the very good is being able to do it again and again and again. And the best athletes out there, most of them that I can think of, don't win all the time because that's not possible. Winning isn't loyal to anybody, but they consistently stay ahead of the game.
And so then talk us through some of the things that we can do to address these various mental blocks.
Sure. So I offer 3 suggestions, and we can talk about them in general terms so that everyone who's watching and listening can kind of relate it to their life. So one way is actually nothing to do with your mental and everything to do with your environment. And often we will have anxiety, fear, frustration, worry, anger because of the environment, because of the people we're keeping around us, or the situation, the physical, environment, our technique, our equipment, the people, the environment. So if we can manipulate the situation, and I say that in a good way, if we can manipulate what's going on outside of our minds, sometimes that automatically relieves the mental block inside. So that's one situation. And in the business world, I've had people, now that many of us are working remotely, I've had people just rearrange their office. And you think it's maybe simple or insignificant. It can be very significant, depending on which window you're looking at, or the colors in your room, or the organization. So that overwhelm and that frustration can sometimes be taken away with just manipulating the environment. I've also had people change locations of countries, right? So it can go from small to big. If you can't manipulate the external, if you can't change your situation, or you can but you don't want to because that can bring other stressors, then we want to reframe things. And I'll share a story if I can, and I'll use an athlete. This is a story that I tell often because I think it will relate to everyone. I had an athlete who was a junior athlete, so he was 19, his last year of being a junior athlete, and he could practice really well, train wonderfully. He choked in competition. And the mental block was one of intimidation. So in practice, right? It was all about what he's going to do to improve his game, present moment. And in competition, he was intimidated by three specific opponents. What are they going to do to beat me, is what he thought about. That was the mental block. How are they going to beat me? The interesting thing was that those three opponents were also his teammates. They were there in practice when he was focusing on himself. They were there in competition when he was focusing on them. So we can't change the situation because those three opponents are there, and everywhere he goes, they're not going to quit. He's not going to quit. So we can't change it. So I asked him to think about it differently. And I asked him a very clear question. What level of competition? Who do you want to be competing against? People much weaker than you, at your level, or way above you? Who do you want to be competing against, when it matters most? And he said, I want to be competing against my peers. I want to be competing against someone at my level, because then when I win, it means something. I also have a chance of winning because they're not much better. So aren't you happy that these three opponents are there with you in competition? Aren't you choosing them? And he said, yes. So instead of saying, oh no, what are they going to do to beat me? Thank you, opponents, for showing up today. I want you to bring your best because I'm going to use your energy to motivate me to bring my very best and beat you. And he reframed that story, but then you have to rehearse it. You have to train. So he journaled it. He visualized it. He talked about it to me. And then he went off to Sweden 3 months later to compete in the Junior World Championships. And not only did he beat those three opponents, he became the Junior World Champion.
Very cool indeed. So we talked a little bit about stress and pressure. So what role? Let's talk about how stress, the role that it plays in performance, both in the business world and in the sports world, and how can people harness it?
It's a performance enhancer. We can harness it and use it. So you have to remember what pressure is. We feel pressure for things that we care about. We feel pressure for things that we believe we can have an impact on. We can do something. We can be successful. So that's actually a sign of self-belief. And obviously, we feel pressure when we're passionate about something, when we're motivated to do something, when we're in alignment. It's a value of ours. I don't feel any pressure when I'm just learning something new and have no expectations because I have no confidence. I don't feel pressure about things that I don't care about. I feel pressure about things that I do care about and that I do believe in myself. So we have to remember that pressure is a sign of desire and belief. So that's the first thing. And then what physiologically pressure is energy. Now, a great example is, those butterflies in your stomach that we all can feel no matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
Well, those butterflies can be anxiety producing if they're swarming all around us, taking over our bodies and our minds and taking over control. Or they can be energy when we take control of them. A great symbolic imagery technique that performers use is put those butterflies in an inverted V in your stomach, just like birds fly above, so that just like birds, we can be efficient. We can be effective. We can be fast if we need to be fast. So pressure is energy that's inside us physiologically that we can then use to go out there and make something happen with our strengths.
That is it actually reminds me of years ago with my kids, and they were competing in karate and doing kumite, which is combat, which is pretty full on, right? When you're a kid, and actually when you're a parent, watching your kid do any type of sport, you kind of get into it and live a bit vicariously. But when you see your kids fight, it's completely different level, right? But I remember talking to my kids, and Kira was at one stage talking about the how she was feeling anxious and nervous. And I was saying to her, that's just energy. That's all it is. And you need to harness that energy. And we did this little process around her creating this best self. We call what she called Shaka, which is she came up with that word, which is, I think it's Zulu for great warrior, right? And she actually decided, when she was competing, I think it was in the Victorian Championships, she actually said to me, Dad, I'm going to use this energy to transform me into Shaka. And as soon as I step onto the tatami, that energy is going to transform me into Shaka, which I thought was really cool. So she took a couple of little techniques and molded them together and actually used that energy to actually give her that lift or to transform her. I don't know if you ever saw the kids program, The Transformers, where they would transform into something else. And it is really about harnessing that. And when you talk to athletes and go, it's exactly the same, like nervousness, anxiety, it is energy. And all you got to do is harness that energy. You're a caged lion and just say, it's not time yet, not yet, right? So
I was going to say,
go.
An additional tool that your daughter used, which is, I know what you teach people too, is that best self, right? So the difference, one way that we can distinguish between anxiety and arousal, nervousness and excitement is confidence. It's really hard to be anxious and confident at the same time. With anxiety brings self-doubt. Nervousness, like this is a challenge, I care, and like there's a lot of energy and I can maintain confidence. So you had the best strength. With everyone that I work with, we always start with your top 3 fundamental strengths. And so when you're experiencing that pressure, one way to harness it is to remind yourself that this is energy. And I'm going to now choose one of those top 3 fundamental strengths and expose myself to that stressor with my strength. And that is how you kind of stay away from the anxiety zone and embrace the arousal zone, which is where peak performance happens.
Yeah, and it's kind of like this Goldilocks effect, isn't it, really? When you're talking about pressure, it can't be too much, it can't be too little, it's got to be just right. Because if there's not enough, your body's not going to be aroused enough, right? So I think having that frame about arousal, under arousal, over arousal, optimal arousal, and forgetting about anxiety. And what you're talking about are those little techniques that just bring the level of arousal down into the Goldilocks zone where it's really ideal. And I think that's really key for people to understand, isn't it? Is that without pressure, without stress, you cannot perform at your best. Like I think everybody can relate to a job that they did at some stage that was as boring as batshit. And I think if they reflect, their performance wasn't great, because we all need a level of arousal to get ourselves interested, both our bodies and our brains, right?
Right. And I was just noticing your pen. I use the same pen. I love it. The 4 colors.
Yes.
No, it heightens your attention. That's what this energy does. That's what the pressure, the stress, it heightens our attention. It, again, increases blood flow. And a certain level of, chemicals flowing through your body that we need. But you're right. When we go past the point of our ideal zone of optimal functioning, when we go past that point, it's too much muscle tension. Our focus either gets too narrow, or sometimes it's too broad that you can't focus on anything at all. So our concentration is impacted, our body is impacted, the mental blocks come flying in when you go past that Goldilocks, when you go past that point of your ideal zone. So we need to first identify what our individual zone of functioning is, and then you have to create. I mean, I'm a big believer in it's not just about knowing this, it's figuring out how to do it, how to get into that zone. And we all have visual cues, attentional cues, verbal cues that we can utilize to consistently give us our best shot at getting into that ideal zone of functioning.
And so to get all of this right, like how important are routines. So you will see anybody who watches sport closely will see certain athletes that have certain routines. You think of a pretty famous one, Nadal, the tennis player, before he serves, has this little routine that he does that it involves picking his undies out of his arse as well. Right?
You actually mentioned that in our first go around here. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, he does.
Because it's the one that really sticks with me, right? Because it's so noticeable, but he does it or did do it all of the time. But talk to us about the importance of those routines and getting people into that mindset or that zone of optimal performance, and how can business people, mums, dads, how can they use some of those techniques to just make sure that they're in that zone of optimal functioning? Because as we said, too little there's no motivation, too much, it impairs everything from cognition to motor control to reaction time, all of that stuff.
It's essential. It's essential. And what it does is it primes your mind, it primes your emotions, and it primes your body. And, routine, that's how we get it into our subconscious, right? We are creatures of habit. But nothing started off as a habit. Everything started off as a ritual. Everything started off as these consistent routines. And the more we do them, the more they became ingrained and then became habit, setting ourselves up for success. And as we mentioned, yes, it could be, picking out your wedgie, but it could be certain songs. There are athletes that hum to themselves. There are affirmations, mantras. There, you'll see people kind of maybe they're talking out loud, but on TV you'll just see their lips moving. Music, you see top performers listening to music all the time. That is very selective music that they are using to zone in. I once,
it's not a random Spotify playlist, is it?
No. Her name escapes me, but there's this female hurdler. She dances. Like, you can just Google the dancing hurdler. Just do an online search for the dancing hurdler, and she's got her hands on her hips, and she's like swaying and happy. And you go down the line, and everyone else is so serious, and she's just doing this to keep herself enthusiastic and energized, because obviously anger does not suit her before does not prime her. So we can do so many different types. Again, visual cues, physical cues, verbal cues. They're all attentional cues that we create a routine around, that we do consistently, that aid us to give us the best opportunity to get into that zone. And then here's the other thing that I'd like to just intervene here too. It's not only just about the pre-performance routine. I'm also a really big fan of the post-performance routine, so that you can have closure at the end. You can put a period at that end of your performance, whether it's giving a presentation, whether it's having a difficult meeting, going for a 5K run, whatever it might be, having a post-performance routine so that whatever happened in that performance does not automatically have to have anything to do with your next performance, good or bad.
Yeah, that's actually a really important point. And that transfer from sports psychology to the business world. And I will actually often talk to leadership teams around this, that when I was in the military, every time we went on a flight, so I was military air crew, we did a brief for the flight, and always, without fail, did a debrief, right? There wasn't a single flight that I ever went on that we didn't do a debrief. And the debrief was about, what went well? Did it go according to plan? Did it not go according to plan? What sort of stuff did we learn, right? And that debrief came out of really the aircrew world, because it's a very dangerous game. I remember an old crusty pilot who was training us, called Nige Hennell, told us that when he first got his wings and went out on his first assignment, he went on an aircraft carrier and sailed from Southampton in the UK to the Far East. And he said by the time they got to the Far East, half of all the aircrew were dead, because operating helicopters off ships in the 1960s was particularly dangerous. So they created that culture of having a debrief all of the time. And then any incidents that happened, everybody heard about those incidents. And still to this day, you're not allowed as the aircraft captain to sign out your aircraft unless you've read all of the aircraft incidents and signed off on them. And that whole idea was learning from ourselves, learning just those little things that happen consistently that you might not notice, but also learning from others. So I love that idea of that closure as well, and using it as a learning lesson. Because it's really important that we do that, right?
It's essential. And at the time of this recording, Lindsey Vonn she retired, a downhill ski racer. She retired and then at 40 came back into ski racing. And she just earned a silver medal in a World Cup. And in an interview,
wow.
Yeah, and she's had so many crashes. She's actually has a knee replacement. And I don't know any other athletes that have come back after retirement with a knee replacement and being away for 6 years in her sport. But the reason I bring her up is because I was just listening to her give an interview, and she talked about all of the past performances, and I quote, learn and erase. Because you have to have, and that's that closure piece. Do you completely erase it from your memory? Not possible. Maybe, and you don't always want to do that either. But if you're going to go from one performance to the next, you have to be present, right? The best performers are the ones that are in the moment, present. So you debrief, you learn, and then you momentarily at least erase the performance so that you can then move on to the next present performance.
Nice. I like that. And that idea of present actually leads me into another question around process versus outcome. So what talk us through that. I'm just going to throw that out to you. Process versus outcome.
It's all I care about. The process. It's all I care about. Athletes, whether you're sport, business, wellness, you'll come to me and in my private practice, you might tell me what it is that you want to achieve. I will, I'm not going to actually ask that question though. I want to know what your best strengths are, and then I want to know what your process is and see how we can improve upon it, what's working, what's not working. Eventually I'll learn what the outcome is that you're wanting. And if you come to me and tell me, that's great too, if you know it. But there are people who actually don't know what their outcome goals are yet. There are people who don't really know what it is that they are doing what they're doing for. And that's perfectly acceptable to me. Let's get into the process. And then you're going to see what you're made of. And it's the only way to truly realize your potential is to dive into the process and be consistent with that. And then let the outcome take care of itself.
Yeah. And I find actually working with karate athletes. So I've been doing a bit of mindset coaching for the Karate Australia athletes who are wanting to get to the Olympics, the World Championships, and talking to these elite guys when they are in competition and they're focused on the outcome, on winning. That's when they say that their performance goes to rat shit, right? And it's because it's a distraction, and it also tips you out of that Goldilocks zone and puts that extra pressure on about winning or who's in the audience watching me, that sort of stuff. And it does two things, I think. One is it distracts you from being present, and you talked about the importance of that. But secondly, you're then, with that attention going to the outcome, it actually adds pressure. Well, what if I lose, right? Am I going to win this? That sort of stuff that can tip you out of that Goldilocks zone into over-arousal that can then affect performance. So it's kind of, it's a little bit twofold, isn't it? From both of those things.
It also changes the experience of the outcome, in my humble opinion. when you're so focused, like you said, the necessity to win, whatever winning means to you, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be first place. Whatever winning means to you, whatever that goal is. If you're so focused on it and not focused on the process, if you do happen to get that win, sometimes it can be more of a relief than a celebration.
Yes,
And
indeed.
that's unfortunate because you've worked so hard. Let's celebrate this instead of, okay, thank goodness I did what I set out to do. And listen, I do believe, obviously, I do believe in goals. I believe that they are very motivating. They when you fall down, they're a reason to get back up. They provide persistence and determination, and they help you create strategy for the process. Because this is what I want to achieve. Now, how am I going to get to it?
Yes.
But if that is what we're focusing on in the moment, it is a distraction, like you said. So let it motivate you. But you have to be very aware of when it actually is hurting you to be focusing on the outcome instead of helping you with that energy we were talking about. The process is the present moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked really there about, you mentioned a little bit about failure or bouncing back. How do you help people to bounce back from setbacks? Because sometimes when someone has a big setback, whether it's in the corporate world or in the sports world, it can be absolutely crushing for them. And that ability to bounce back is really key. So what are some of the techniques that you use that everyone can use to help them just bounce back and get back on the track?
Sure. It's kind of similar to the acceptance of pressure. We have to accept that failure is an option. I am not a big fan when I hear people say failure isn't an option. It is an option. It happens to every single person. There is not one top performer in business or sport that has, won every single step of the way. So failure is an option. Phew. Like relief, it can happen. So now I don't have to focus on it. Now let me focus on the process. So that's one thing. But even in addition to that acceptance, we talk about striving for perfection, demanding perfection. I think those are two different things. I personally strive for perfection. I want to be perfect every single moment of my life. But I do not demand it of myself because that is unnecessary negative anxiety. So I strive for perfection with the understanding, this is why I'm going to bring in the acceptance of failure, with the understanding that I will at some point fail. I will fall down. So the then goal, if you will, is to not just strive for perfection, but I also have a secondary goal to be the best recoverer I can be. So if I make a mistake, I'm not going to harp on that mistake because I'm not done yet. The work is not done. My work is now, how am I going to best recover? If I'm giving a keynote and I forget my next line, right? I'm not just going to walk off the stage. No, I'm going to be the best recoverer I can be. How am I going to immediately get myself back up? Team sports do this all the time, or athletes do this all the time. If they have a failure, they're not done yet. It's not over. They have to best recover. And often, the athlete who wins at the end of the day is not the perfect athlete. It's the athlete that best recovered. So we have to change our mindset, strive for perfection, but failure happens. Okay, accept that. And now my focus is when I fail, how am I going to best recover? And often that's going to lead me to the optimal success.
And how important in recovery is learning from failures? Is that always an important part of the process? Or are there times when you can still recover really well without actually going through and going, what can I actually learn from this?
I think it depends on the situation. So if you're now in a meeting and you stumble or someone, throws a question at you that you can't answer, you don't really have a moment to go off, take 5 minutes, take 10 minutes and recover and then come back. You have to bounce back. A figure skater falls in their routine. They don't get to just sit and learn and recover. They need to bounce right back. So you have to really understand the situation in which you're in. Other times there is an opportunity to recover, to renew some energy, to let the emotions kind of work their way in and out. If you're doing recovery properly, the emotions will come in and then you'll let them go. And then you can bring the logical mind back in to say, okay, how can I then move forward from here? So it really depends. Sometimes you're not going to have a lot of opportunity. So you'll have to get to it when you do have the moment.
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense, is that you can use the learning during the debrief, right? When there's time to debrief, when it's over. But as you say, sometimes you're in the thick of it and you've just made a mistake and you need to just get back on the horse super, super quick.
Right. So you'll have to shelf the learning for later. Yeah.
Yes. And is that where some of these cues come in? Whether that's like a little mantra that you say to yourself, or what are some of the techniques that people can use in that moment, right when they're in the thick of it and they screw up and they realize they screw up? How do they really quickly get themselves back into that performance zone and not overthink or what I just bloody did?
Yeah, so it's a really shortened version of that post-performance routine. We were talking about closure, or another word is reset. So it's reset. Yeah. So maybe your mantra is right, left, right, left. That's my mantra. Right, left, right, left. What's next? What's next? I know that tennis players will stare at the strings of their racket, or if they're right-handed, throw it into their left hand. Little change. I love, for all industries, business, health, and sport, progressive muscular relaxation that you can do very quickly. Because when you make a mistake, your body tends to tense. And it's really hard to just relax. But you can go from that tense to even more tense for 5 seconds, and then you've got somewhere to go. Progressive muscular relaxation. So you can just take a body part, just tense it even more than you already are tense for 5 seconds, and then let it out. And that can be a physical reset.
And that physical reset plays into the psychology. I mean, this is really important for people to understand, isn't it? That there's this two-way interaction that, and most people get that your psychology really affects your physiology, right? Somebody who's really stressed feels it in their stomach, feels the tension, all of those things. But your physiology massively influences your psychology, doesn't it? And just that little extra squeeze can not only relax your muscles but relax your mind.
Yeah, it's also an emotional vent. So it relaxes your mind, it vents your emotions. In performance psychology, when we're talking about techniques, tools, strategies, we're often either teaching mind-body techniques, which means something you do to your mind helps both your mind and your body. But then there's body to mind techniques. Something you do to your body helps your body and your mind.
Interesting. Talk just a little bit more about those body mind techniques, because it's not something that a lot of people will have heard of.
So the body to mind would be an example, that progressive muscular relaxation, taking a body part and tensing it for 10 seconds, hold, and then you relax. And as you said, which you're completely right upon, that not only relaxes your body, it also will then automatically calm your mind. Breathing is a physiological technique, so that's also a body technique that goes to your mind. Tapping. Not that I know, I'm not an expert in tapping, but tapping is when you literally, you
Oh, yes.
You tap certain
emotional free, and we call it emotional freedom technique, I think, don't they?
I don't know.
There's an emotional freedom technique that I believe involves tapping. Somebody will put me up if I'm wrong about that, but yeah, that because that's big, and it's mediated, all of this, through the nervous system, 100%, right?
That's what it's, yeah, absolutely. Just going out there, I was just actually this last week on a call with an athlete who was experiencing she needed to reset quick, she was triggered. And the reframing, the mind to body techniques that we were talking about weren't really working. So I told her to go and do some sprints or some push-ups or some jumping jacks, high intensity, not to blow your physical energy, but very quick. Just do something to get the blood circulating through your body, which automatically will change the energy in your mind. because you're kind of, your heart rate's up a little bit, the blood's circulating. You're going to have a different mental, psychological, and emotional experience just by going and getting your body, you know, all that blood circulating through your body through some high intensity movement.
Yeah, I remember actually one thing about like pinching your
Yeah.
thumb and your forefinger. You know, those there's just so many things that people can do to just give themselves that reset. And I love the idea, this concept of reset, and it's just something that you can do super quick. Whether it's a word, whether it's squeezing your thumb and your forefinger, whether it's squeezing your leg muscles or whatever, and I think our listeners should practice that, right? And then it's about repetition, isn't it? Because what it's doing then is it's setting up a loop, a Pavlovian learning loop in your brain.
I was just about to say we're all Pavlov's dogs. So yes, absolutely.
Yes.
But you nailed it, the practice, the training. This is the best lesson we can learn from athletes. Actually, probably what you did too, flying planes and in the military. The best lessons. There's a lot of training that goes on in military. There's a lot of training that goes on in sports. Athletes train much more than they compete.
Yeah.
We have to train in our lives. We have to train and do these tools when we don't need them so that when we do need them, they're accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. And that training, there is a shitload of hard work that is in behind effortless performance.
I love that, effortless. Well, well, and for sure with the mind. I mean, the whole purpose in my mind, the whole purpose of mental training is to quiet the mind and the emotions so that our bodies can do what we've been training it to do. And that's the whole, and that would be effortless movement, right? Like we don't have to let
Yes,
our bodies just
yes.
do what we've been training it to do, but our mind and our emotions get in the way. So we have to train it to kind of shut it or work for us, and then it becomes so much more free movement, effortless.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's note, because so you've mentioned attention a couple of times, and attention and focus are two words that are intimately related. Um, and attentional control. I've been thinking more and more about attention. I was involved in this Delphi study, which was identifying the trainable cognitive drivers of performance under pressure. And in this Delphi study, there was a whole heap of experts. There was sports psychologists, business psychologists, military psychologists. We all had to rate these trainable cognitive primaries, as they were called. But the one thing that everybody put at the top of the list was attentional control. And I think number three was arousal control, right? I think number two was performance monitoring. I'll actually flick you the paper. You'd love the
I would love
paper,
that,
right?
yes.
But that and I've been thinking more and more about attention, because whatever you pay attention to, your brain commits cells to, and your body is oriented towards, right? So give us some practical tips, because with athletes it's all about training that focus, which is essentially training their attention. So what are some tips that you use in sports psychology that anybody, whether they're an amateur sports person, or we'll have professional sports people listen to this, or business people, or even just normal people, how can they train their focus? What are some practical things they can do?
That's such a great question, and I actually think it is. I would agree that it is the number one, because without attention, I don't know how you follow the right, left, because
Yeah. You
if you don't
can't.
know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else, right? Who is that? Is that Yogi Berra? I forget. Which therefore I believe in goals, but aware attention, to me, the first thing that we have to understand is what's relevant and what's irrelevant. And we have to have the awareness of what's relevant and irrelevant. So in any moment, business, sport, fitness, At any moment, you can stop and you train yourself. So take inventory 3 times a day. Just stop and look at what you're doing and say, what is relevant in this moment, and what are kind of distractions that are irrelevant. So you and I are talking to each other, right? If I see, because there's a window in front of me, if I see somebody walking, irrelevant, I have to assign them the irrelevant tag. You are the only relevant person in my life right now, Paul, right? So we have to, and it's really important to have that, because if you make everything a priority, then nothing is a priority. So the first way to train attention is to understand what is relevant and what is irrelevant, with also the understanding that it can change. What was once irrelevant then becomes relevant. And in sport, we have this amazing ability to train. Like if you're a golfer, you know, first things first is you have to kind of scan the environment, have a broad external focus. And then you bring it internal to strategize. So you're no longer looking out. Now I'm actually assessing what I just saw outside and bringing it into my brain. So I'm going internal, narrowing it down, coming up with one strategy. And then, then I'm going to, again, go external but narrow. Am I focusing on the ball, or am I focusing on where I'm hitting the ball? Or am I just going to keep it internal and focus on my breath to calm myself down? So you have to be able to train your ability. In performance psychology, there are 4 different types of concentration. And it's on a spectrum, right? There's kind of look like a quadrant. You have the broad and narrow, and then you have the external and internal. So you either are looking broad external, scanning the environment, or, looking at one thing, that would be broad, narrow, or internal, broad, kind of just, you can like scan your body for any tension. You can do a broad scan, but it's internal. Or maybe I'm just focusing on my breath. Maybe I'm just focusing on my stomach expanding and contracting. Internal, narrow. So we have to practice those things. And you asked me for tactical tools. One exercise, which I like, that anybody can do for any purpose. It's also a mindfulness technique, but just go outside. And if you're on, a 17th floor, just stick your head outside. And if you can't really go outside, it's okay. Just look around you in-house. But just for a moment, tune in to your vision. What do you see? And block out everything else. Everything else is irrelevant. Just what you see is relevant. 10 seconds. And then for another moment, 10 seconds, only focus on what you hear. Then only on what you taste. Then only on what you feel kinesthetically underneath you, and then only what you feel on your skin, for example. So you move from one sense to another sense, and that's training you to tune in to what you're deeming irrelevant. So that's one way to do it. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I actually think people should rewind and re-listen to this little section, listen to it over and over again and get it into their heads, because I think that the big problem today is just our loss of attentional control and the attention thieves around us, from mobile phones to emails to people double screening as well, and their attention goes all over the place. So that attentional control, the stuff that you just talked about, using the different senses, or another meditation technique is bring your attention inside your body, now bring it outside your body to the outer world, and then bring it inside. And that ability to control, or to be in control of your attention, I think it's just so critical. But sorry, you were about to just give another technique.
Yeah, it's actually a fun game. I do it with so whoever's watching, listening, if you have kids, you can do it with your kids. It's called the concentration grid. And you can just go online and type in concentration grid, and it gives you a grid of numbers scattered. The ones that I use have start at 0, 0. So maybe the one that you find will start at 0, 1, and it goes to either 99 or 100. And you time yourself for a minute, let's say, And you have to go and find 01, then 02, then 03, and 04. And you go as fast as you can and see how many numbers you get, how high you can get in order in that minute. So that kind of is your baseline. And then through that, normally you kind of find a strategy that you'd like. Maybe it's just going, horizontal, up and down, or I don't know if you're just going to kind of stare at it and see if the number pops out at you, but you come up with a strategy. And then the second time you do it, your intention, your process is to see if you can beat or match. So there's a game, there's competition, see if you can beat or match the numbers. But here's the catch. You have to stay with the strategy that you chose. That is you training your brain and, to have focus, to have that attention and commit to a strategy. And that is also training your attention. You can also start to play music or have people try to distract you while you're then focusing on the numbers. That's also fun too, right? So that also trains your attention. But I'll tell you what the coolest thing is. So I've done this training for myself. There's always room for improvement, but I've done this training for myself. And I will tell you what's super cool in my business. I can be working on an email, for example, and then I get a text message or my phone rings, and I have the ability, I have the skill set to stop in the moment or not stop if I've deemed everything. Like right now, everything's off, so I don't have to focus on anything but you. But in other times of my life, there are going to be distractions. But I have the skill set now to stop, look at that text briefly, and then I have the discernment to say irrelevant, relevant. And then I can go back because I also have the muscle of concentration to just shut it out. It goes on mute and go back to what I was doing. And I think people don't have that skill. We get lost, we get distracted, and it's really hard to get back into the project that we were working on.
That's a superpower, being able to just go irrelevant and then get back on task really quickly, because the research shows that it often takes people a minute or more to get back on task. And actually, I present research in my talks. There's a famous study called Brain Drain, where they actually showed that if your mobile phone is sitting on the table, upside down, on silence, it actually reduces your working memory capacity and your fluid intelligence by about 10%. And those people, that's the average, but those people who are more addicted to their smartphones, it actually has a bigger impact on their working memory and their fluid intelligence. And it's just, these things are attention thieves, right? And they are productivity killers. I can tell you how many meetings that I have witnessed or talks where people are just on their mobile phones and thinking that they're listening, and you just know that they're not listening. What we do is we chunk, right? So we fill in the gaps, and people think you can multitask. That's bullshit. What we do is we very quickly shift our attention, and we're actually filling in the gaps, right? And Jesus, if you could just make people really understand one thing in terms of for their productivity, and I think their overall well-being, it would be to just minimize these bloody distractions, because they are just a productivity killer and a concentration killer. And then it just goes on to then having scattered attentional control.
100%. No, so obviously that's the first step to remove. I mean, listen, if we're really going to get the easiest way to improve your attention is to get rid of distractions, right? Like to remove.
Yeah, but I actually, Hayley, I think with your attention, you're training it in one way or another. So you're either, through your daily behaviors, you're either training your attention to be focused and in your control, or you're training your attention, like if you're not doing something deliberate, that world is actually training your attention to be completely scattered.
I love that. So you're training either way. You're either training yourself to be in control.
There is no not training. There is no not training, right? It's just kind of come to me. You are training one way or another, whether you like it or not. So choose the way you bloody well train.
Right. No, I love that too. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That is, it's true. It's like motivation. I don't believe in being not motivated. You're either just motivated to get off the couch or you're motivated to stay on the couch. So, and I know you're a big fan of getting off the couch. So,
yeah. But that is true. People say I'm not motivated. Yeah, you are. You're motivated to do fuck all.
Right. No, you're right. It is training, and so we get to choose, and it's super cool. I actually really like it when I have the ability to just tune things out, even though they don't need to go. They don't need to go anywhere. I'm at that level now, but I get engaged in the training, where I can just look and no, that's not relevant, and then get back to what is.
And so you in your book, you talk about pressing mute on distractions. Is that what you mean about pressing mute? Talk us through that a little bit, because obviously I think what you have now is a bit of a superpower, and it's come through training. It's not genetics. But talk to us about this idea of pressing mute.
You know, a great example that I've had to teach myself is, I've always been some type of teacher, where I was teaching at the university or being a group fitness instructor and then keynote speaker. And inevitably, there are people who are going to come in late, leave early, get on their phones, very seldom maybe, go to sleep. But I do believe I've probably seen that once or twice in my day. People close their eyes. To me, they're irrelevant, but I had to train myself. I had to remind myself that they are not the ones that I'm talking to right now. Maybe once they get sit and settled and they am I really going to devote my attention to them and focus on them, which is going to hurt me and the people who are listening? Or am I going to focus on the people who showed up on time, who's with me, who's asking questions? And so that is a great, for me, example of training that I have had to endure, in addition to when I was I continue to be an athlete, in addition to going, I'm a mountain biker. It's a new sport for me. I'll just go to sports. I'm 4 years into this thing. It is by far my most feared sport. Am I going to focus on just yesterday, am I going to focus on the fact that I could fall down this cliff and roll? Or am I going to focus on getting my butt back and light on my handlebars? I have to train myself, butt back, light up on my handlebars. And
I tell you what, I think mountain biking, especially going downhill, is one of the best attentional focus exercises that you can do, because you cannot ride down a mountain distracted about shit and thinking about the party tomorrow night, right?
No. It is. Oh my goodness. Yes. The intensity of
it. It is mindfulness personified.
Yes. But listen, when you use it right, it heightens your attention and if you do it really right, it heightens your attention again on what's relevant. You have to be able to decide for yourself what it is that's going to help you and what it is that's going to hurt you if you focus on it, and then have the skill set to go and focus on what you've deemed relevant.
Yeah, the example you gave about doing a keynote talk, I can really resonate with that, right? So you're doing a keynote talk and you see somebody putting a mobile phone out, or a few people having a conversation while you're giving a talk. And there's a part of my brain that just wants to go, okay, sorry, you two over there. I'll just wait until you're finished, and then I'll continue with the talk, right? But you have to. Well, you could do that, or it's about shutting it out, isn't it? That really, because it can start to eat away at you, and then you lose track of words and all of that sort of stuff. And yeah, I totally resonate with that one.
Yeah, it's distraction. When I used to teach like group fitness, indoor cycle classes, and there was maybe there was two people chatting. I just would actually get off my bike and go stand right beside them. I wouldn't talk to them. I would just stand right beside them and lead.
I've actually done that, where I sort of walk over and linger around the table. And sometimes just kind of look at them while I'm talking.
but that's even a strategy. But to me, that's a strategy to still stay on purpose, right? For me to stay in, but almost use them as a tool to help me, and also tell them to zip it at the same time without really.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Implied intimidation. That's what it is. So, that we do have to wrap up in a minute, but you talk about a mental toolbox for people, and I love that concept. So what sort of things, tools do you include in it, or should people think about including in their mental
Yeah.
toolbox?
So in the book Personal Podium, what I really pride myself on is strategies. So if you want tools, if you want techniques, if you want, the screwdriver, the wrench, the hammer for your mindset and performance, this is where you go to get it. And I talk about, well, even though we briefly mentioned, outcome, I don't necessarily think outcome is just goals, but I look at goals. And I look at just the 3 goals that you need. Visualization. This is the way to visualize. Recovery. This is the way to recover. Performance, preparation. These are the tools that you need. Do you need them all the time, every day, all day? No. But you want to have them accessible. You want to train them when you don't need them, and then stick them in your mental toolbox so that when you do need them, your mental toolbox is there and you can pull out the hammer of productive self-talk, the wrench of symbolic imagery, the screwdriver of music for reset. So that's what I mean when
Yeah.
I say mental toolbox.
Yeah, I love that idea. Okay, so people, if you would like to have a mental toolbox, get yourself on Amazon and Google Personal Podium by Haley Perlis. So where can we send people, Haley, if they want to know more about you, get the book or any other courses, because I know you got some courses, and do you also do coaching, distance learning?
Yes, yes, and yes. I do have master classes on my website, how to beat defeat, self-belief. You are injured, the injury mindset. It definitely coaching in person and virtual, keynote. I am on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, but the best place to really connect with me is my website at drhaleyperlis.com. You can opt in and get weekly mental toughness moments, a video of me talking about these tools that we have in our mental toolbox. And if you have a question and you write me a note, I'm the one that gets it. So I will respond.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Excellent. Good stuff. Haley, thank you for your time and your wisdom and helping to translate the techniques from sports performance for everyday people. Because I think there's so much, excuse me, in sports performance psychology that everybody can use just to improve their lives and get up that podium, the personal podium.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul, for all that you do.